Would you believe a new green Federalist deal? I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle now. And Bill, there's an article in the Washington Post talking about how many states, given what they view as the hostility of the Trump administration toward environmental protection, have taken this matter into their own hands. And I'll give you some quick examples, and this is from the Washington Post. Hawaii, New York, and California have moved to ban widely used agricultural pesticides. Michigan, New Jersey are pushing to restrict a ubiquitous class of chemical compounds that have turned up in drinking water, saying they can't wait on the EPA to take action. Colorado and New Mexico adopted new policies targeting greenhouse gas emissions, and more than a dozen states have adopted policies that will force automakers to make more fuel-efficient cars than those required by federal standards. Now, Bill, I know you're a constitutionalist and a conservative, and don't you love to see this federalist concept in action?
I do.
So tell me, what, if any, risks do you see of having each state deciding what its air quality standards will be or what kind of cars should be permitted to be manufactured?
Well, I don't agree with any kind of, I don't know if I believe in any kind of emission standard, to be honest with you. But I have to say that this is one area where the EPA, not as a national, let me rephrase this. Keeping the air clean and keeping the water clean is important. And it's not so much the EPA, but the Air Quality Management District in Los Angeles has taken what was, when I arrived here in 1988, summers that were just cotton white where you couldn't see 4 blocks. I haven't seen a day that hazy in 10, 15 years now. So it does some good. And to the degree that environmental protection does good, I'm in favor of it. But the EPA...
Now, wait a minute. That sounds like an instrumentalist, situational ethicist kind of answer to the thing.
How so?
As far as it... In that it does some good, you're in favor of it. Are you just saying, well, the outcome of the law is the important thing? There's no real underlying principle of whether there should be regulation?
No, I'm saying that the EPA accomplished what it needed to accomplish. There never should have been an EPA. It's not constitutionally funded. I agree with all of that. The effort that was channeled through the EPA, which could have been done in a much better way, never through the states, for example, nevertheless accomplished a big cleanup of America. And the problem with the EPA is not that it didn't clean up the pollution. The problem with the EPA is that that was 30, 40 years ago now, and it keeps on getting bigger and bigger, more and more expensive to do less and less, and is now just a means of shutting down businesses. It's not what it used to be. There are a number of federal programs that I think are probably dubious from a constitutional point of view, and therefore I'm against them. But the reason that these programs were put in place were in fact real problems, and that doesn't mean that I don't want to see those problems solved.
So the real question is whether this should occur at the state and or local level, and mostly we're talking about states here, or at the federal level. And some businesses are saying, well, I don't really want the government in my underwear at all. If it's got to be there, then it would be better if it were uniform across the country so that we could make reasonable decisions based on a stable regimen of regulation.
Yeah, uniform across the country so that we can make reasonable decisions based on one person, or at very, very, very best case scenario, one party. No. The Constitution's pretty clear, and the Constitution is clear. The reason that there's an enumerated powers section of the Constitution is because by saying the specific things that the government can do, it is by definition kept to a reasonable size. And to the degree that you push anything, it can be environmental protection, can be education, all of it, even to a large degree, things like the National Guard. The more you push this out to the state level, the more you disperse the power. And the American idea of governance is just about that. That's all. The founders never went around saying we're better people. Americans are morally superior to anyone else. No, not saying that at all. What they're saying and what they said was, just like any other humans, they want to accumulate power for their own ends. And so we're going to put up as many structural barriers and sluices and walkways and guardrails as we can to make sure that power doesn't end up in one place in in this gigantic country, which is really 10 or 12 different countries of ours. As I said before, New England is different than the Cajuns and the Seattle crowd and the San Francisco crowd, very different than the people who live in Georgia and so on. So keeping the power out of the federal government is the most important thing. And the nice thing about this is that if you put these regulations, these new ones in place, the one that you're talking about on this segment, and it costs a lot of money, and that causes businesses to either go out of business or leave the state, then they will do one of those two things. I live in the most regulated state in the union, and I need to be here. This is where show business is. This is where the whole pulse of insanity is. But if I wasn't in the business I was in, I'd be living somewhere else.
Well,
and
your
that's
state
the
is one
beauty.
of the problems, Bill, and for this reason, let's say California passes a regulation essentially demanding that automakers up their mileage, ratings for their on average across their cars. California alone could, in effect, force the entire automobile industry to change its miles per gallon, and could cost the rest of the country a lot of money in terms of higher prices for automobiles. So if you let the states do things like that, then I think, in effect, you make California the federal government, do you not?
Well, that's an interesting argument, and I'm not trying to say that losing the California market wouldn't be a blow to any car maker. But I think the one thing that everybody can agree on is that the cars' relation to California is they're all leaving California, not coming in. So this market continues to grow smaller and smaller and smaller. And let's just walk out the example. Let's just see how it plays out. Let's say California wanted to double the mileage requirements of any cars on the American market. Anything that comes to California, let's just say for the sake of the argument, has to get 50 miles to the gallon. So what's the result of that? Car makers, let's take Detroit, let's take Ford just as a specific example. Okay, Ford is going to have to look at the fact that they cannot possibly get the entire fleet up to 50 miles per gallon. I'm sure Ford would make a car that was 50 miles to the gallon. It's probably a 2-cylinder car, but nevertheless, it's legal in California, and that would give you this. But what I'm basically saying is, yes, that would be bad for business. Absolutely, it would be bad for business. But mostly it'd be bad for Californians. And there seems to be no limit to the amount of flogging we want to do to ourselves out here. So this is part of the great experiment for me, is watching how much pain a people can take with a big smile pinned to their face about how virtuous they are as their life goes to hell all around them. It's kind of interesting to watch. But Scott, here's the thing. It would be disadvantageous for California to set a 50 miles per gallon limit on cars being sold in the state of California. That would let me just get through this. That would be economically disadvantageous. There's no question about it. And a number of people might get hurt, including the automakers. And you could even make the case that by losing the California market, you might even put one of the big automakers out of business. Let's just say all of that happens. That's not just bad news, that's a catastrophe. But it's not as much of a catastrophe as the overwhelming growth and concentration of federal power. In other words, if you do something like this and you're dispersing political power at the cost of economics, the market will figure out a way to get around the problem that's been artificially put in there by the idiots in Sacramento. And to the degree that power is spread out of Washington, it's a net gain for the country, but that doesn't mean it's good. It doesn't mean it's as good as it would have been. It just means that it's the better of two bad choices.
Well, it's interesting that you choose that specific number in your example, because last year the Trump administration actually proposed freezing federal mileage requirements between the model years 2020 and 2026, rather than letting them go up to where the Obama rules, the rules set in place by the Obama administration, would have taken them to 50 miles per gallon. That was the rule in place, and the Trump administration is trying to get that rolled back. States like Colorado and New Mexico acting on their own to roll back, to change methane standards, for example. New Mexico took 73,000 acres in the northwest part of the state off limits to drilling because they said it was a sacred land to some Indian tribes. But it's interesting, Bill. They're doing this as if their hair were on fire and there's a major crisis. But according to the EPA, overall methane emissions have dropped by 4% in the Permian Basin, which is New Mexico and Texas, even as production of methane doubled between 2011 and 2017.
They're running around with their hair on fire, Scott, because they have to run around with their hair on fire. The equation is very, very simple. It's the same reason why America has to be portrayed as the most racist place in the world, also the most violent place in the world, and also the most warmongering place in the world. If America's not a horrible place, then why the hell do you need these left-wingers to come in here and change everything? It's really just that simple. If the country's not going to hell in a handbasket, if our children aren't in immediate threat, and I mean immediate, as in the next couple months, of drowning before they burn to death, if this isn't going on, then what's the reason to have a progressive party in the first place? If life is good and America's good and we're a good country and our soldiers are decent people and the economy is clean because it's smart to be clean, and fracking has taken away coal because it's just more effective economically, not because it was forced down on us. If all of these things are in place and America's a swell place, what do you need progressives for? If the place is a great place, you might as well just stay there, which is kind of the conservative position. I think we've gone way too far in some things, need to go back a little bit. But this explains all of it. And the thing about the 50 mile a gallon thing is that it is, of course, depriving people of their freedom. It is depriving them of their freedom by saying that you can't have a truck. If you live in New Mexico, you want a big truck? I do. I'm sorry, you can't have one. If you're going to be, look, I don't buy any of this, mind you, but if you're going to play this game, I think it's much more fair to do it through a gas tax, right? That way, if you want, look, I'm crystal clear on this. I think the whole thing's a catastrophically bad idea, but if you do it as a gas tax, then people can still drive their trucks. It just costs more money for them to drive them. But to say that they're just simply banned, and by the way, does anybody else not think that there's going to be some workarounds here?
Well, I'm just thinking if automakers don't really have a lot of new cars coming out that produce 50 miles per gallon, that means Californians will have to hold on to their older cars for longer. And we know that as cars get older, their emissions increase because their engines are less efficient.
I'll tell you what I was kind of thinking of. A large number of people go from California to Las Vegas every weekend. And if I'm driving from 50 mile a gallon California to Las Vegas and I see a 3 gallons to the mile monster truck, that's powered by nitro burning, 7 Hemi nitro burning things, and puts out a plume of fire 40 feet long, and I like that, and I think that's cool, something I want to own. Then I imagine that they'll be selling a lot of cars in Nevada that will be registered in Nevada but driven in California. I just think the idea is a bad one, and I think they're going to find out what we found out with the small, stupid little thing here in California. It was January 1st of 2014 where the city of Los Angeles declared that after 1st of January 2014, the plastic bags that you use to take home your groceries in any other part of this free country are simply not going to be available anymore for love of money. So, for about a year, everybody had to use paper bags. And since the grocery stores and so on weren't really happy about this, they were usually really thin and crappy paper bags. And it takes you back to realize paper bags are junk compared to these plastic things. That's why everybody likes the plastic. They don't hold anything. You got to hold them on. You can't carry them. It's a mess. So here's the point. So California is, well, we're going to do something about plastic in the environment, so we are going to ban plastic bags in LA County on January 1st of 2014. And after about a year, what you began to realize was you could go to the supermarket and you could still order plastic. Now they give you plastic bags, but the bags were much thicker and much heavier because they are reusable plastic bags and they cost 10 cents each. So what happens is you put a ridiculous law in place, like prohibition or anything else. You take away something that is convenient for people and not really an issue. I'm not saying plastic in the ocean isn't an issue. I'm saying plastic in the ocean is not a result of people throwing bags into the sewers in Santa Monica. I think U.S. is responsible for something like 3% of the plastic in the ocean. So So when you have something like this where you're basically hammering the freedom of the people down, you are going to find workarounds, loopholes, cheats, whatever you want to call it. And another fine example of this, by the way, is the example of trying to limit, basically try to ban the AR-15 in California. I mean, it's a perfect example of this, of what I imagine would happen with cars. Just to recap, because it's fun, they decided that you could not have an interchangeable magazine. So they made a version of the Bushmaster which had the magazine welded. It could take 10 rounds, but you had to pull the pin, crack the rifle in order to reload the rifle. Nobody bought that. It was a piece of junk. Then they said, well, what's the definition of a removable magazine? It turned out that the legal definition was a magazine that could be removed from the rifle without the use of a tool. So along comes the bullet button, which is basically something that says, I can't put my finger here. Instead of the release that normally would drop the mag, there's like a little guard thing. But if you take the nose of let's say a 223, fits in there perfectly, drops the magazine, now you're in business again. Then they changed the law again to say something else about something else. And now there's a simple little thing that you push. It cracks the weapon open that much. And that means that the weapon is now disassembled and you can actually reload much faster than you could before. And this is what they're going to be up against. You cannot we're just smarter than they are. That's all there is to it. And watching this with the AR-15 thing is going to be like watching it with the environmental thing. It's going to be watching the people outsmart their governments because their governments are not very smart. Now, I want to stress again one more time that if we were talking about somebody pouring mercury into a river, then we're talking about something else, because pouring mercury into a river is the perfect example of I think you should be left alone to swing your fist so long as it doesn't hit my nose. And I think people should be able to run their business any way they want to. But if that business is pouring mercury into the water that I have to drink, now they are infringing upon my rights. And this kind of environmental policy, this kind of environmental cleanup is, in my mind, not only legal, but moral as well.
Well, it may be that the people are smarter than their government, but one wonders whether the Republicans are as smart as the Democrats, because the Democrats at this point, on a state-by-state basis...
We're going to find out about that in first Tuesday in November of 2020, but please continue.
The Democrats are using the Republicans' prized possession, that idea of states' rights or federalism, whatever you want to call it, against the Trump administration's environmental agenda. Don't you find that the dynamic tension in that is just a little bit ironic and frankly shows the Democrats to be a smart group of boys and girls and maybe up to the challenge that's presented by the Trump administration?
Well, among the smart group of boys and girls that you mentioned sit the legislators in Sacramento, California, who have watched not only without dismay, but with absolute glee, watched businesses flee the state in record numbers. So I don't think they're that smart. And this is the kind of thing where federalism is actually a good thing. Look, if California wants to make 100 miles per gallon, California could ban automobiles, Scott. They could just ban them. I mean, why not just take it to the ludicrous extremes? Because it's easier to understand that way. California has banned automobiles on the roads in the state of California. And if you're caught driving a car, you'll be arrested. That's the time for me and every single other person in California to leave California, but it wouldn't come to that because that kind of a ban simply would be ignored. They're talking about a water rationing system in California. Apparently, these laws are already on the books. I think they're talking about 50 gallons per household per day, not per person, per household. And I'm told that the average shower is about 35 gallons. So 50 gallons per person per day. And if you go over that, there's going to be a $1,000 fine for each use. So I am looking forward to seeing a $1,000 fine being levied on families in East LA who are trying to wash their children. And when that kind of thing kicks in, the people simply say, all right, that's enough of this nonsense. We've had enough of it. So yes, it should be a states' right issue. If it turns out that California wants to ban automobiles and it sticks, and most of the other idiots want automobiles banned too, then I move to Nevada. And that argument is the same argument that applies to any other part of federalism. that I like, but it specifically does not apply to sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, because that is not a case of the states' rights. That is, in fact, the definition of the federal government. The borders of the country are defended by the United States military at the federal level. You don't get to take yourself out of federal law in that particular area. But in things like gambling, prostitution, drinking, all of it, if you want to pass a law that says this is a dry city, it's a dry county, it's a dry state, go ahead. That's what the experiment's all about.
We want to thank the members at BillWhittle.com for making this show possible, along with 47 other shows every month, as well as a member-exclusive blog with more delights than we have time to describe here. Suffice it to say that it has quickly become one of my favorite reads. If not, I will say my favorite read on the internet at this point. And if you have not yet tried this out, and let's be honest, you can become a member at BillWhittle.com this month and cancel next month if you want to.
Absolutely.
My guess is, though, you won't want to. So why not give it a shot? It's just $9.95 a month, and you can go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link and find out what it's all about. We appreciate your help in doing this. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com. They make this show.